following lecture was produced by Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization, and is one of hundreds of lectures freely available via download, podcasts, streaming radio, and transcription. These lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures, books, courses, and articles to find teachings that suit you. Through the support of donations, Glorian Publishing has published 40 books, hosts international retreats several times a year, offers free online courses, and many other valuable resources, available to anyone worldwide. All of this has been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Your donations make it possible for this free public service to reach thousands of people every day. To make a tax-deductible donation in any amount, even anonymously, visit GnosticTeachings.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.
Losarla Tashi Dele. That's Tibetan for Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Today is the first day of the Lunar New Year, which corresponds closely with the new Aquarian year, which began just a couple of weeks ago. To preface today's lecture, I wanted to mention that because a new year represents a new beginning, a cycle that has begun. And that's why in the West we've always symbolized the new year as a newborn child. But as the Master Samael told us in his writings, we can learn very little from birth. But from death we can learn everything. When there is a birth, for example, a new year beginning, that beginning was only made possible by the ending of the former year. That great cycle of beginning and ending is at the basis of all things, on every level of nature. Everything begins and ends in great cycles, great circles or spirals. So no matter where we look in nature, at any level of the universe, we find beginnings and endings. In the midst of those beginnings and endings are great progressions or movements of energy. Those movements of energy form a continuum, a flow that has no beginning and no ending, but are instead a series of beginnings and endings. Our mind struggles to conceptualize the infinite, and yet time is that. It is an infinite circle. It has no beginning, it has no ending, but it is a series of beginnings and endings. That clue is at the very heart of gnosis. The comprehension or cognizance of birth and death. Not only birth and death of a physical body, but birth and death of a soul, of a planet, of a universe. For the next few lectures that I give, I'm going to explore and analyze the subject of death. Death has many aspects, many facets. We will analyze and study the death of our physical bodies. I know it's an uncomfortable subject, but it shouldn't be. In reality, for the serious Gnostic, death is the goal. Death is our crown. It is the crowning achievement of a Gnostic. That's not to say that the Gnostic seeks death in and of itself, for itself, meaning that we just want to all rush out and be killed. That's not the meaning. Because at the same time that the Gnostic seeks death, the Gnostic preserves life and does everything in his or her power to protect life, including their own. What the Gnostic aspires towards is a perfect death. Is a death at the right moment, at the right time. Because that perfect death is the gateway to real existence. The existence that we have now is not real. It's an illusion. What we see as existence is fundamentally mistaken. What we see and perceive and taste and touch and hear is all filtered by subjective elements in our psyche, and thus we do not see reality. Through a perfect death, we gain that perception of what is real. The goal of the Gnostic is to achieve that perfect death and to prepare for it every day. It can be said that Gnosis is training for death. And it is a process of dying. For the real Gnostic who's practicing seriously, whether that person is called Gnostic or a Buddhist or a Christian is irrelevant. By Gnostic, we mean someone who is acquiring spiritual experience. For that person, their spiritual process is a process of dying, not physically, but psychologically. A continual process of radical death, in which all that is illusion, all that is false, dies. And what is born is truth, cognizance of what is real. In order to begin to experience that process of death, we need to study death. We need to understand death and not avoid it. Culturally, we avoid death. The very subject of death makes us uncomfortable. We do our best to ignore it, to avoid it. And this is to our great detriment. This is a very significant indicator of profound ignorance when we want to avoid the subject and topic of death. And we find it becomes more pronounced as we age. Amongst old people, we often find the tendency to not use the word old. They want to say, I'm 80 years young. And we smile and think it's cute, but really it's foolish. It's an indicator that the person is not willing to recognize their achievement of being old. And also what is waiting for them, which is death. The elderly should be respected and honored. And yet they aren't. Because we don't want to face our own mortality. We prefer not to deal with older people. And when we do, we want to deal with them as quickly as possible and be done with it. And that's why in Western culture we find the tendency to put older people somewhere where we don't have to see them all the time. And put sick people where we don't have to see them all the time. In traditional times, in ancient times, the sick and the elderly were cared for in the home. And now we don't do that. We want to put them somewhere where we don't have to see them. And this is a signal of our ignorance, of our aversion to reality, because we don't want to deal with the fact that we ourselves will die. We have no cognizance of death, no comprehension of death, but we have a lot of ignorance of death. The Gnostic tradition teaches and emphasizes the importance of death because of its great importance in the spiritual path. To be a truly experienced spiritual practitioner, you cannot avoid death. In fact, you have to embrace it. For the real spiritual practitioner, someone who's got experience, in other words, a true Gnostic, death ceases to be a source of fear. Contemplate that, because for most of us, death is a source of great fear and uncertainty. We are terrified because we ignore. We don't know what will happen. We're very afraid. And we're afraid because of our attachments. We're afraid because of pain. We're afraid because we don't know what will happen. We don't want to lose our families and our loved ones. We don't understand what death is. This is why we're going to teach the next few classes, to help us overcome that, to not be afraid of death, but instead to look forward to it. Not to rush towards it, but to use each day to prepare for the inevitable. We will die, and none of us know when. In normal circumstances, if we knew that a big event was coming, we would prepare. If we were going to make a trip or a journey, we would do everything we need to prepare in advance so that when the moment comes that we have to depart, we're ready. And yet, who among us has prepared for death, which is a great journey that everyone here will take? And we're not prepared. Real gnosis is about preparing daily, being ready, so that when death arrives, we're not caught surprised, but instead we're caught aware, attentive, not avoiding it, not ignoring it, but ready for it. In this way, we can see that a prepared Gnostic, someone with real spiritual experience, sees death as an opportunity to move on to something better. We're very attached to life, but we don't comprehend life. We're very afraid of death, but we don't comprehend death. If we comprehended life, we would understand that life, as it is now, is a stream of suffering. And if we comprehended death, we would understand that death is an opportunity to transform suffering. Oftentimes we see someone who's very ill and suffering intensely, and we expend a great amount of energy and effort to extend the person's life. When there are cases in which the person would be better off to die and take a new body, rather than extend their suffering for days or weeks or months or years. This is because we don't comprehend life and death. We don't understand what happens when we die. And this causes a great amount of suffering in the world, not only for the person who's ill, but for the families, for the ones that are close with that person. In the Gnostic tradition, like every other, by Gnostic tradition I mean all those traditions in the world who acquire true gnosis and teach true gnosis. This includes the tradition of Samael Aun Weor, but also the traditions of Tantra in Asia, and the Aztec and Mayan traditions, in the tradition of Islam, particularly related with the Sufis. Death is a topic of great importance and is celebrated, not avoided. In these images that I have to show you, we see that death is not avoided, but in fact it is celebrated. and utilized. This image of a seated Buddha shows Padmasambhava, who's also called Guru Rinpoche. And he holds, you'll always know it's him, partly by his mustache, his beard, but also by his hat and his red robes, and by his staff. The staff that he holds in his arm has many symbolic elements on it, which we don't have time to study in detail today. But you'll see at the peak, just below the Trinity, at the top, the trident, which represents the three forces, you see a skull. It's not accidental, and it's not just to scare you or be decorative. This is showing the role of death in his enlightenment, in his realization. In his hand, in his lap, he's holding a human skull, the top of the skull. And inside of that skull is a nectar, ambrosia, amrita, the food of the gods. That has a very rich symbolism, but pointedly related to death, the death of the mind, the death of the eye. It is in that we find the elixir of long life, immortality, the ambrosia of the gods, is in comprehension of that. This next image shows a meditator in a hut or a small building that's constructed for meditation. And with his eyes open, he is observing a body being consumed by wolf and birds. Most of us see this type of image and we feel repugnance, which is avoidance. Note that in yourself. That impulse to not look at it, to not see it. That impulse to not look at the reality of death is a sign of our aversion to death. It is a sign of our ignorance. The Gnostic needs to look squarely in the face of all experiences and neither avoid or indulge, but instead comprehend. This image represents the foundational teaching of all forms of Buddhism, which is naturally a foundational teaching in Gnosis, which is Buddhism. And that is comprehension of the inevitability of death. This is why in Sutrayana level instruction, which is the foundational level instruction, all students undergo an extended period of meditating, visualizing, imagining their own death. Not just once, but every day. To daily meditate and imagine one's own death. Most people, when they hear about that, think, that's so morbid. Why would you do that? It's only going to make you miserable. This is the reaction of the ego. The reaction of the I, which is our obstacle to enlightenment. The reality is, we will all die, but we don't realize it. We're not cognizant of it. We don't comprehend that. The evidence is abundant. If you knew you were going to die tonight, wouldn't your schedule change? Wouldn't your activities for the rest of the day be very different from what you originally intended? That proves that we lack cognizance of death, because it is 100% possible that any or all of us could die today. No one can disagree with that. None of us know when death's coming. This building could collapse. There could be an explosion of a gas main. There could be a war. There could be a bomb. There could be a disease. There could be any number of causes which at any moment can arrive without any influence from us, without our ability to overpower it or contradict it. Death can come like that. And the graveyards are filled with people who are very surprised by death. If we were cognizant of our own inevitable death, our behavior would be very different. This is why it's important to study death, to meditate daily on one's death. This is not simply to meditate and think to oneself, one day I will die, so I better be a better person, spiritual, practice more. It's fine to think this way, but the actual practice is to spend time visualizing the decay of one's body. Take a moment now. Feel this body. Become cognizant that it will die, that life will recede from it, and that all of its functions will stop. The blood will stop flowing, the breath will stop flowing, the brain will shut down, the organs will stop moving, and all of the heat will begin to recede towards the heart, and the body will become cold, and it will never move again. Do any of you feel terror? Fear? This is why you need to meditate. So that when the moment of your death arrives, you will not be afraid. The instant that you die, your state of mind determines what will happen to you next. If you die afraid, that fear will propel you. And you don't want that. We want to die cognizant, in harmony, peacefully, with a balanced psyche, so that as we pass through the doorway of death, we can enter into a new life cognizantly. You see, life is very complicated. Bring into your imagination now life. Not just your life, all life, all that is living. Imagine all life on every level. Quanta, molecules, cells, organs, organisms, families, communities, societies, cities, countries, continents, planets, solar systems, galaxies, universes. Life is huge. It's very difficult to hold that in one's mind. The immensity of living, of all that is alive. But you see, as complex and beautiful and terrifying as life is, it is only one side of a great coin. When you flip that coin, you have death. And it is just as rich, complex, sophisticated, beautiful, and terrifying as life. But we completely ignore it. Even though, for countless ages, we have passed from one side of the coin to the other. How do we know this is true? None of us remember, right? We know it's true because we know about energy. Anyone who's studied physics has heard of Einstein. And the great gift that Einstein gave to us was this: energy cannot die. Energy cannot be destroyed. Scientifically, this is a very profound and beautiful statement, just in terms of materialistic science. But this statement has even greater importance to your soul. The soul, the consciousness, is energy. You can test that. When you pay attention to something, you use energy. When someone pays attention to you, you can feel it. You can sense the energy. You can have all of your senses turned away from a person. But when they look at you, when they pay attention to you, you can feel it. And you turn around to say, somebody looking at me? Right? Everybody knows this. Everybody can experience that. You sense the energy of the consciousness, the attention of that person. Now in us, our consciousness is weak and small. It doesn't have much strength. It isn't trained. But if you train it, you can do things with it that we scarcely imagine. Consciousness is an energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. What this means is that the consciousness doesn't die. It doesn't die. The consciousness is an energy that changes. It changes according to cause and effect. This is what we need to understand. How it changes. What are the causes and what are the effects? When we say that consciousness does not die, we need to understand what that means. And how does this relate to death? There's a great teaching about death and life that can help us a lot when we try to understand if life, if energy, if consciousness cannot die, then how does that relate to this life and previous or subsequent lives? If we can accept the scientific fact that energy cannot be destroyed and thereby consciousness as an energy cannot be destroyed, what happens to it when we die? What happens to it before we are born? This is what we don't know. This is why we're afraid. You can find out what happens tonight. Every time you lay down to go to sleep, you die. The same thing that happens to you when you go down to sleep happens when you die. The energy of consciousness is modified. Instead of being here in the body, it goes out. And we experience what we call dreams. And a certain period of time goes by during which the physical body is resting, like a corpse. And after a certain period of time, the consciousness is pulled back. Maybe our alarm goes off, somebody wakes us, or we have a habit to get up at a certain time. The body is stirred and the consciousness comes back. And for a moment, we might remember, oh, I was here. I was at work in my dream doing this and doing that. But after a few minutes, we get up, we're active, we're doing things. We don't remember anymore what happened, right? Most of us remember very little of our dreams, and many of us remember nothing. That's exactly what happens when you die. Except, generally, it's more traumatic. Because generally, when we die, we don't die as peacefully as when we go to sleep at night. Generally, we die because of illness, because of sickness, because of pain, because of suffering. And thus, through a traumatic death, our consciousness is propelled through a state of being about which we have no recollection. and then propelled again through a state of birth that is traumatic and painful, about which we have no recollection. If you want to know what happens to you when you die, pay attention to what happens to you when you sleep at night. It's exactly the same thing. The only difference is the connection between the consciousness and the body is severed with death. In other words, your energy is extracted from that body and it dies. But the consciousness continues. Modified by karma, cause and effect. This is why the meditator is meditating. This is why the meditator is visualizing his death and the dismemberment of his body in order to train his consciousness to be prepared and to train his consciousness to not be attached to the body and to comprehend its reality, that the body is impermanent. The body is not me. The body is not myself. It is only a vessel. It's like clothes. When we go buy clothes, we get very excited and attached. Oh, I love my new shirt. And we love it for a little while, and then it gets worn out, and we toss it aside and we go buy a new shirt. Same thing happens with the body. The body lasts for a while, but it gets worn out. We need a new one. That's why we are born and die. Comprehension of that produces equanimity, non-attachment. This allows us to pass through these transitions or changes cognizantly with knowledge. This next image is a painting of a Mahasiddha, or a great practitioner, named Liupa, who's a Tibetan yogi. And it shows this yogi eating fish guts. Sounds good, doesn't it? His nickname was Gut Eater, or Fish Gut Eater. We all think this is disgusting. Pay attention to that. That aversion is significant. The reason that this image was painted and the reason that this story of this meditator has come down to us over many hundreds of years is that it shows a teaching that his life represents. He wasn't eating fish guts to impress us. You know how little kids do that? Well, I'll eat that disgusting thing if you give me a nickel. That's not why he's doing this. Luipa is eating the entrails of a fish to represent the training that one needs in the mind to not be attached to any sensation, but to see sensations for what they are. He was training his mind to be in equanimity, to have one taste. That is the taste of reality. To not be attached to pleasant sensation and to not avoid unpleasant sensation, but to comprehend, to have no preference. That equanimity is central to comprehension of death. We don't have that. All of us are very much conditioned, and if you want to put the more accurate word, it would be caged. Caged in attachment to pleasure, and caged in aversion to the unpleasant sensations. I recently had the beautiful opportunity to observe a friend eating a fish soup. And this friend was loving the fish soup. and ate one bite and thought, oh, I don't know what that is. So he asked, and it was fish guts. And you should have seen the change in his face. Let me point out something that happened there. Before he knew it, he liked it. But that concept, fish gut, it was the mind that did not like it, not the tongue. That's what this image is representing. This tendency that all of us have to be a victim of the mind's preferences for pleasure. To us, it may seem insignificant. What difference does it make? Why shouldn't we enjoy the pleasures of life? And then we have this dualistic game that the mind starts to play. Well, does this mean that I should now only seek unpleasant sensations? Should I just be eating fish guts all the time? You see, the mind gets trapped in these dualistic notions. The answer and the teaching represented in this painting is to comprehend death, which is on the skull, the skulls and bones that he's dressed in. One needs to develop one taste. And that is to taste all things as they are. To not have the preference, the craving and the aversion that swing on the pendulum of ignorance. Do you see those three forces at work? Craving, aversion, depend on ignorance. We suffer because we ignore the reality. Thus we crave and avoid. By comprehending that craving and aversion, we can see the ignorance. And when we can see the ignorance, we can acquire knowledge. We need to develop that capacity of one taste to a very powerful degree. Because when we face death, we will probably face death with pain, with anxiety, with the crying and moaning of our loved ones, with the tearing of our own heart, because we don't want to leave our children, our parents, our spouse. It's going to happen. Notice in yourself that you want to avoid this. That aversion is ignorance. It is what's swinging the pendulum of suffering in your life. Don't avoid it. Comprehend it. We will die. Prepare yourself. Start now. That training is a process of comprehending craving and aversion. Understanding. Not having preferences, but instead resting in the midst of whatever happens and being the same. This is why Samael Aun Weor said we have to let ourselves be carried by the current of life. Right? He said that, but then in another passage he said we have to swim against the current. Both are true. Going with the current of life means that we should not be focusing our attention on changing our external circumstances. That means when someone serves us a plate of food and we react with craving or we react with aversion, that's ignorance. We should instead react with gratitude and eat it. With gratitude. Whether we like it or don't like it. That plate represents not just food, but life. Karma. Life is going to serve us a plate of bitterness. And life is going to serve us a plate of sweetness. And our reaction to that determines our future. What this means is that we need to understand the current of energy, the continuum or flow of forces that move through us. The moment that we took birth, something was put in motion. Energy was put in motion. Visualize in your mind a ball of energy, light, propelled through space. That energy, that light, is constantly changing because it's acting. And every instant it acts. It's affecting how it is propelled. Its direction, its velocity, its angle. Visualize this, because this is your consciousness. This arrow or beam of light that's moving through space is not moving through time, but instead through eternity. And it is the measurement of everything that you do. So if you can imagine that your physical body is a vessel that is energized and activated by this flow of energy. But look past the third dimension and imagine in your mind's eye a strip of film, like the old-fashioned movies, and in every frame of that film is an instant in time. What lets you see those frames? Light. Light passes through the frame to let you see it. And as you move that strip of film, there's motion, and you see yourself moving through life. But that strip of film has a beginning and an ending. Birth to death. Every frame of that film, which is every moment of your life, represents action. How that light passes through that frame of film, and the light is modified. And through that modification, you see the images. In other words, in every moment, we're transforming something. As that strip of film is moved across the ray of light, we have the illusion of life. We feel and believe that we are here and now living. But it is not real. Feels real, looks real. It is not. When you die, you'll understand that. When you awaken in the astral plane, you will understand that. When you have an experience with your soul, you will comprehend that this life is not the real life. It is that comprehension that allows you to start to see that that film strip that's moving across that ray of light and modifying everything can be changed. The scariest comprehension that happens when you engage in this effort is when you start to realize not only that the energy of consciousness doesn't die, and that we have lived before in another body, but that previous body was pretty much the same life that we have now. I know that most of us like to think that in our previous existences, we were great masters. We were Joan of Arc, or Mary Magdalene, or John the Baptist, or somebody like that. But that's your ego. If you want to know who you were in your previous life, look at who you are right now, because that's who you were. You were the same. Doesn't feel good, but it's true. That film strip gets played over and over. This is a phenomenon that's called recurrence. And it's a law of nature. The psychological tendencies that we have repeat again and again, from existence to existence. Yet in each existence, they become more complicated. Is your life complicated now? Or passes through phases of complication? Those phases of complication were set up in your previous existences. Don't avoid them. Don't avoid looking at them. Comprehend them. And it's through that comprehension that you can stop the repetition. This is what's represented in this image. Singhepa. There's another Mahasiddha. This Mahasiddha is represented with a vessel of water or liquid in his right hand and a peacock feather in his left. And on his head is a skull and a scroll, a scripture. This Mahasiddha is representing that through comprehension of death, through gnosis or knowledge, which is that scroll or scripture that he is always mindful of, comes the ability to equilibrate forces, which are his two arms. The liquid, the water, is very significant. It is also ambrosia and rita, which is related with sexual energy, but also all energy. It is knowledge. It is mayim in Hebrew. And you see that he's pouring this liquid out to a woman in the bottom corner. That woman is a disciple. In other words, he's giving his knowledge. Just a drop at a time to aid that disciple. And in his left hand, he has a peacock feather, which he holds very gingerly in a specific mudra or posture of his fingers. The peacock feather is a very significant symbol in all Asian traditions. The peacock represents, in Hinduism, Krishna, Christ. But in Tantra, the peacock is extremely important. The peacock, according to legend, eats poison. That's its food. And yet, look at what it does with that food. It eats poison, but creates the most beautiful display of feathers on any bird. The bird is related with the mind, the capacity to fly on the winds. The peacock represents a tantric practitioner who takes the poisons of life, the bitterness of desire, craving and aversion, and comprehends that and transforms it into beauty, into love. This is the meaning of Tantra. It is a continuum or flow of energy that we learn to harness and transform. This is the great teaching that death gives. We learn to transform death into life. All the Christians and Jews are waiting for resurrection. Yet none of them fully comprehend that to resurrect, you have to die. And that death is not physical, it's psychological. All the scriptures are totally equal in stating no murderer can go to heaven, no adulterer can go to heaven, no fornicator can go to heaven, no thief, no liar. We are all of those things. How are we going to go to heaven unless those parts of ourselves die? They do not die with physical death. Energy is not destroyed. Death doesn't destroy energy, it destroys the body. And it liberates the energy in the body. And that energy goes on. Death is not the end. Death is a doorway. We're ignorant of that doorway. We need to become cognizant of it. Everything is modified by laws. Death is a law. And it is modified by laws. And what happens to us at death is controlled by laws, not belief. There are millions of people who firmly deeply believe that when they die, they will go to heaven. But they don't know what happens until it happens. And they don't come back and tell us. Look into your own life and see, does belief create? Does belief have that much power? It doesn't. What has power is action. If mere belief took us to heaven, then all the great saints and prophets from all the traditions would not have had to give us so many teachings. All they had to say was, just believe. But they didn't. The Christians think that if you believe in Jesus, that's it. That's your ticket to heaven. But there's no evidence of that. Jesus never said it. Instead, what he said was, the path to heaven is very narrow and very difficult, and there are few who find it. He didn't say that everybody who believes will go. He never said that. Likewise, in the Jewish traditions, nowhere does it say that the believer will go to heaven. Nowhere. What it says is, the tzaddik will go, the righteous one. And who is righteous? He who is free of sin. No anger, no lust, no preferences for materialism, no attachment to things like gold or property, but a soul that is completely free of attachment and focused only on God. In Buddhism, this is taught very beautifully by a traditional story. I haven't been able to find the scripture where it's recorded. And I've told the story before, so forgive me if you've heard it. But it's beautiful and it illustrates this perfectly. The Buddha was once teaching, Buddha Shakyamuni, in India. And a woman came to him crying, holding her dead child. And came to the Buddha and said, please, can you bring my child back to life? And the woman was completely distraught. And the Buddha, in his great wisdom, said, go into the city, find a house where there has never been death, and bring me a mustard seed from that house. So the woman left and went all around the city from house to house to house, asking, has death ever been in this house? And every house she went to, someone had died. And little by little, she started to understand that everyone, every house has death. It can't be avoided. It's beautiful. Another similar teaching, a man came to represent his family to the Buddha and asked the Buddha, please, my father is dying. Can you pray for him so that his soul will go to heaven? And the Buddha said, seeing that the young man was very emotional and very attached, the Buddha said, fetch me a jar, 2 jars, some rocks and some butter, and some wax, and a long stick. So the man got all the elements, and the Buddha took him to a nearby body of water, a lake or a river. And he said, put the rocks in one vase, seal it with wax. Put the butter in the other vase, seal it with wax. The man did so. And the man was full of faith. He was convinced that the Buddha was going to do a ritual to propel his father's dying soul to heaven. So the Buddha said, put the jars in the water. And the young man did so, full of faith. And the Buddha said, take the stick and break the jars. And the young man did so. And after a moment, the butter floated to the top and floated away. And the Buddha said, I can't do anything for your father. What will determine where he goes is what is in him. what he has done. We need to look in our mind. What is in us? The rocks represent attachment, heaviness, density, pride, anger, resentment. The butter represents the purity of consciousness that is unattached, that is refined, that is light. What happens to us when we die is determined by what is in us. The quality of that light stream of our mind that is propelled through space, through eternity, by our every action. Every action modifies energy. When we act, whether with the body, the heart, or thought, with anger, we modify the light of that moment with anger. And anger does not belong to heaven. Anger belongs in hell. It is a hellish energy. That action of anger, that thought, that emotion, or that physical action causes that energy to become trapped in complicated laws, meaning it becomes dense. And every time we persist in acting on that anger, we make it more dense. The same is true of pride. The same is true of lust. The same is true of envy, gluttony, laziness. In every moment, that film strip of our life is passing by, and we modify energy in every moment. That means how you will die is determined by your state of mind right now. If death comes right now, your state of mind will determine the nature of your death. Think it's impossible? Many people have just laid down and died. Like that. My uncle, that happened to my uncle. He laid down, young man, laid down and died. Nobody expected it. In my own family, every case of death was unexpected. Not one person in my family was waiting for death. Not one. All of them were caught surprised. And in that surprise, that shock, the pain, the uncertainty, all of those qualities modify the consciousness. The last moments of the dying one define their death. This is why the Gnostic trains for the perfect death. To be prepared. To be ready. So that death is not a surprise. Death is a welcome doorway. This is why we train constantly in attentiveness, in one taste. Whatever experiences are coming to us, we don't accept them or reject them. We comprehend them. We transform impressions. When someone criticizes us, we transform that into love. When someone praises us, we transform that into love. Not taking the words personally, but instead comprehending the person who said it and comprehending the effect of the words on ourselves. When life gives us bitterness, we don't react with aversion, we comprehend. We receive those impressions and accept our karma. When life gives us bounty, we don't become attached. Instead, we receive that as karma, knowing that things are always changing. Today it's good, tomorrow it's bad. We have to be always attentive, on the cusp of the wave, receiving everything with indifference. That indifference is not the indifference of not caring. It is equanimity that cares but is not attached. It's like having a child. If you're a parent, you know that sometimes your child is very happy, comes and gives you hugs and kisses, and the next minute the child is angry and screaming and hitting you. If you react, you make it worse. If you get angry, if you hit the child back, if you ignore the child, you make it worse. In both cases, you have to respond with equanimity and love. This is the precise attitude we need in life. Whatever happens, to respond with equanimity and love. This is all training. Not only are we transforming energy in the moment and putting in motion positive forces that elevate the soul, but we're also training ourselves so that the moment death comes, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, we're in a state of equanimity, not surprised, not like it's sneaking up on us, but we see it coming. And we see it and we smile. And we accept it. That capacity is what gives us the ability to use death as a doorway and transform it. Instead of dealing with death the way every other being on the planet deals with death. In the next few lectures, we're going to talk about what happens when we die. It's complicated. It's not easy to understand because we are only going to be trying to understand it conceptually. I strongly recommend that you meditate daily on life and death. We're going to talk about a variety of practices that you can put into motion. Use them. They'll bear fruit. You'll understand a lot more. It's really not possible to explain death in a discourse or a book. It's like life. You have to experience it. It can't be comprehended through concepts. Remember the example I gave you of how expansive and complicated life is? Death's the same. Very complicated. A lot happens. But what we'll try to talk about are principles. This image is another Tibetan painting that shows couples engaged in the sexual act. And there are two separate examples here. What we need to look at is in the clouds above, there is a being. And above one of the couples is also a being. This painting is showing a choice that we have about what happens to us when we die. I know that in many spiritual traditions nowadays, or spiritual theories, a lot of people now have this belief that we choose our lives. That when we die, we go to some heavenly thing, some heavenly place, and then we get to choose our next life. And so we may look in some mirror of existence and say, you know, I think I want to be born here and have this and that kind of life, and I need these things for my soul. That's all lies. That's all fantasies generated to sell books and sell tickets to come to conventions. It's all lies. There's no evidence of any of that in any scripture in the world. We need to rely on the scriptures. We need to rely on the teachings of authentic masters, not people who are selling books or trying to get us to come to a conference. The reality is the passage through death to another life is extremely complicated and difficult. And if you want to know how it is, look at what happens when you sleep. If you have no cognizance of what happens to you from the moment you fall asleep to the moment you awaken, you will also have no cognizance of what happens between lives. Zero. If you want to determine your next existence, your next body, you need cognizance of what happens to you when you're sleeping physically. You need to be awake. If you are awakened all night, then you have a chance to be awakened after death. It depends on how you pass through that doorway. If you pass through that doorway through a trauma and become identified through your death with an attachment to your family, attachment to your children, attachment to your car, or your wealth that you've amassed that you're going to lose now, that attachment will determine your state as you pass through the between. This is why we have to train so hard. Every day. Start now. Start now. And that way, when you're in the between, you can choose. You can have an impact. In other words, you can negotiate your karma. You see, karma is not a fixed mechanical law. It's negotiable. And it's negotiable precisely through action, through energy and motion. It begins by being awake. If you're asleep as a consciousness, you can't negotiate. You're asleep. So when I say that you have a choice here, it's not like someone's going to say, ding, 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 you win. You would choose A or B. Which way do you want? It's not like that. It's like a choice that you have right now. The choice you have right now is to be attentive and pay attention, or to go off and fantasize and daydream. We're making that choice all the time. Most of the time, we're all fantasizing and daydreaming. We're tiptoeing around the garden of our psychological country, playing games in our mind with concepts and memories and wishes for the future. That's all fantasy, it's all illusion. And if you're doing that every day now, then you're doing it all night. That's why you're dreaming at work, doing the same things you do during the day. That's why you're dreaming with your parents and your kids and your sisters and brothers. That's why you're dreaming the same dreams every night. And that's why you don't remember any dreams, is because during the day, you're incognizant, asleep, unconscious. If you want to awaken consciousness at night, when your physical body is asleep, awaken now, when you're in your physical body. That constant, persistent effort to be cognizant, present here and now, will become part of how you experience night, naturally. You train yourself, because the training is in the consciousness. And when you start doing it at night, then you have a potential to do it when you die. This is the training. We start here and now in the physical body. We extend that effort into the nighttime practice called dream yoga. I know people generally think dream yoga is all about going to temples and having experiences with masters. That's part of it. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is so that you're prepared for death. So that when your death comes, you can pass through the door cognizantly, awake. And so that your soul in the world of the dead will be awake. So that you can negotiate your karma. The Buddha gave a very profound teaching about this that has been terribly misinterpreted by many people. The Buddha Shakyamuni said, "It is very precious to be born as a human being. It is very rare. We should cherish this opportunity." And this is what he said. It is as rare as this example. Imagine the ocean. Picture how vast and deep the ocean is. How huge. And now imagine out in the midst of that ocean is a little piece of thread, gold, in a loop. And by chance, a turtle rises up from the depths and just happens to put its neck through that loop of thread. That is how the odds are stacked against what you have now, a physical body. Some people have interpreted this to say that it's very rare to be born as a physical body. We disagree with that. What the story illustrates is the mathematics, the odds. We're born into human physical bodies because of evolution and karma. But the odds of it, in contrast to all the other existences that exist, to all the other types of bodies, to all the other lives that we've had, that's how rare it is. When you imagine how many times you were born as a mineral in a mineral body, as a plant in a plant body, as an animal in an animal body, or in between states, between those bodies. Millions and millions and millions and millions of times. It's very small window of opportunity when you're in a human body. But that is the window to reach our purpose, which is to become enlightened, to realize the nature of reality. You see that word realize is to experience reality, to see it. Not theorize, not conceptualize, to see it. Cognizant. It's in a humanoid body that we have now that we can do this. This life is extremely precious, but we don't have any cognizance of that. We waste so much time on stupid things. Gossip, fashion, TV shows, harmful friends, wasteful activities. And the Buddha about this said something very profound. If we imagine that our life has about 100 years, he said half of life is taken with sleep. 50 years gone that we sleep. 10 years are spent in childhood. You can't self-realize when you're under the age of 10, unless you're already a great master. Out of the remaining 20 years, sorrow, complaining, pain, and agitation eliminate much time, and hundreds of physical illnesses destroy much more. Look at the math. If you are so fortunate to live to 100, which is rare, half of that life is spent in sleep. That leaves you 50 years. 10 to 20 years in childhood, because really nowadays, once we reach 10, we're a child, but most of us remain totally immature till we're in our 20s. Most of us at 10 have no sense of responsibility at all. I think in Asia, it was different. My spouse is Asian. By the time she was 7 and 8 years old, she was cooking for a family of 10 or 12. She was cooking for them every day. I don't know any American or European kid that does that. Even when they're in their 20s, they are lazy. They don't do anything. All they want is Facebook and video games. That's it. They have no sense of responsibility. They're not mature. So we can say this 10 years of childhood, really nowadays it's 20. Look in your own life and you can see. When did you grow up and start taking things seriously? Probably in your 20s. So that's 70 years out right there. Another 20 lost in old age. When you're old, all you're dealing with is getting through the day. You have all kinds of aches and pains. Your mind is set, very crystallized in habits. It's very difficult to think clearly. And then you've got a remaining, he says 20 years. I think nowadays it's less than 10. In which sorrow, complaining, pain, and agitation eliminate a lot of time. Look at your own life. How much time do you spend sad, complaining about things, in pain, or agitated? Probably all of it. Right? When we're honest. Probably all of our time. And then the rest of the time we're sick. So where in that equation is there time to have an equanimity psychologically and to practice spiritually? A few seconds? A few hours over a whole life? It's not much. And to cap this off, we're going to die, and we don't know when. Do you understand what I'm trying to impart to you? Motivation. Get motivated. Wake up. Pay attention to the realities of life. It is not a game. Life's not about just getting more toys and getting more possessions. To the Gnostic, life is about getting less. We all have this cultural phenomena nowadays about becoming something more. And we get it from when we're born. Our parents want us to be doctors and lawyers or great politicians. And then when we get into spiritual life, we want to be a great teacher, a great master, a great writer. We want to be more and more and more. This is all ego. When you become very serious about your spiritual practice, what you really need is to become less. Less. And this is why in traditional practice, people renounced everything. They gave up everything, owned nothing, and gave away anything that was given to them. When the Tibetans were persecuted and being killed and driven out of Tibet, they were dealing with this very profoundly. And I've spoken with some people who arrived in India still very uncertain about the future because they had no place to go. They were refugees. They had nothing. Everything was taken from them. But were so serious about their practice that even when local Indians gave them tea, which they all love to drink tea, the Tibetans would take that tea and give it to somebody else. They owned nothing, just the clothes on their backs. But their devotion to practice was so serious, they didn't even want to own the little brick of tea. And said, no, thank you. Give the tea to somebody else. You have it, enjoy it. I don't want any attachment because I could die today. I don't want to be attached to anything because at the moment of death, I don't want to be thinking, oh, my tea. But that's the way we are. We would think of those insignificant, foolish things at the moment of death, right? All of us. How much attachments do we have? We're attached to clothes, to money, to people, to places, to things. A lot. Every one of those attachments represents the potential to corrupt our process of death. If you want to reach a perfect death, you must have attachment to nothing but God. Your attention fully 100% on reaching union with clear light, which is God, the absolute. It means if you, in that moment, remember, I left my keys in the counter. I didn't pay the bill for electricity. That will corrupt your death. I know they sound silly, but it happens. When people die, stupid things come in your mind, just like they do now. Don't think that you'll be able to control everything that's going on with you psychologically when you die. It's a very traumatic and difficult experience in most cases. You need to do a lot of preparation to not have that happen to you. What we're trying to do in this process is to avoid what's shown in this painting of the couples having sexual union. In a quick synthesis of what happens when we die, the energy that was projected through our lifespan is a mass of cause and effect. It is energy, light, consciousness projected through eternity. And at the moment of death, that energy will pass through transformation in order to go to another phase. It is a great cycle. That doorway is very powerfully influenced by our state of mind, by what we think and feel when we die. And this is why in the ancient traditions of preparing someone for death, the presence of relatives is very important. How that presence is managed. Because if the relatives are there crying, oh, he's dying, don't go, don't. That person who's dying will not have equilibrium. They will not. If you are encountering or dealing with someone who's dying, do not do that. They need love and encouragement. They need peace. They need serenity and strength. And if you're crying and attached and in pain, you will corrupt their process of death. We're going to talk about that in a later lecture in detail. If you have thoughts of, at the moment you die and you're remembering your car and you love your car, that will affect it. If you have attachment to a person, a spouse, a child, someone that you fantasized about during your life, if those things come in your mind, it will affect the process of your death. if you die angry, if you die afraid. Those qualities modify the velocity and function of that light stream as it passes through the between. That's what's represented here. This soul, which is not developed, it is a buddhata. It is the embryo of soul, or a Tathagatagarbha. It is of the essence. That's why it's just a head. It is an ego, an I. It is someone who's not developed. And that soul is being magnetically attracted to the psychological environment of this couple. It is magnetic. It isn't a choice. That soul doesn't say, oh, they look like nice parents. I want to go live in their house. Nope. That soul is drawn there by magnetism, by karma. There is an affinity energetically, karmically, between the psychological disposition of that disincarnated person and that couple. So at the moment of conception, the bond is made, and that soul is born into that family by psychological affinity. This means your family that you have now is rooted in this law. Simple cause and effect. Psychological affinity. And if you observe families, you can see it. Members of families tend to have very similar psychological habits. We always think it's because they grew up together. No. They were born into it. It's karmic. On the other hand, we have a couple here, and above them in the clouds is a realized being who is developed. It is a soul. It is an initiate who is in equanimity. This person's awake. They can choose to be born or not, because they're negotiating their karma. What that person is doing is something called closing wombs. That's what this painting represents. This is a yogi in meditation on the process of birth. We see a child emerging from the womb of a woman. And the yogi has his hand very gently resisting that. This is called closing wombs. It is a tantric teaching that we'll talk about. It essentially relates to the ability of the yogi who has his eyes up, contemplating above. He is not attached. He is in equanimity, conscious, and thus is not pulled by the magnetism of birth. He's dead, but not being reborn. So this is what we have to comprehend. In the next few lectures, we'll talk in detail about all of these many facets of death. Physical death, mystical death, spiritual death. It's very deep and profound. And if you are interested in learning more about this subject, meditate. You can read a lot of books if you want, but you'll just get a lot of concepts from that. If you really want to know about death, meditate. Meditate every day on your own approaching death. What does that mean? How do you meditate on that? Visualize it. Not visualizing a funeral and all your relatives weeping, because that's only going to beef up your pride. Oh, they're going to miss me so much. I love them. That's not the kind of meditation I'm talking about. I'm talking about meditating on what you don't want to meditate on. Real death. This body that you're in now, stopping. Visualize that. Take time with it. Imagine it. And watch your state of mind. and how you avoid it, and you don't want to deal with it, and your mind wants to be distracted and think about happy things. Concentrate. Visualize the death of your body. Visualize not only its death, but its decay. We are scarcely aware that these bodies that we have are very impermanent and very weak and filled with all kinds of really gross stuff. This type of meditation can have very profound impact on your consciousness. Not only will it give you a great motivation to work hard, and it can give you great serenity and dispel fear, but it can also cultivate enormous compassion. Because when you really comprehend that your own body is going to die, and you don't know when, very naturally, you will start to realize that the same is true of everybody else. And when you look at people, you'll realize they're going to die too. I should treat them well. I should treat them with love. Not anger, not criticism, not sarcasm, not with cruelty, the way I have been, but with great tenderness. Because all of us, if we knew that someone that we associate with was about to die, we wouldn't be mean to them. We wouldn't curse them. We wouldn't call them names. We wouldn't be rude. We wouldn't ignore them. We'd be very gentle, right? Very sweet. We should be that way all the time. Treating each other with a lot of compassion, patience, love. So this activity of meditating on death is not morbid. It isn't gross. It isn't scary. This is why Samael said, from death we can learn everything. Because we can. Do you have any questions? Everybody's sleeping.
Clear our egos. And if we have another chance to come back, how do we store the information of the path to continue in our next life?
Beautiful question. How do we continue the path in our next life? In relation with what happens with the ego and the consciousness. We're going to talk very specifically about that in subsequent lectures. But the short answer is simply this. Our mind stream has levels of depth. What we're experiencing now in our daily life is extremely superficial. That is the personality and the intellect and some emotional qualities. These are all extremely superficial. When we die, all of those things die. We don't take our personality with us to the next life. We make a new one. That means that if we're studying religion or spirituality and we're not becoming cognizant of that, all that information remains superficial, and when we die, we forget it all. And that's what happens to most of us. But knowledge that you have become cognizant of means that it's become part of the soul. It's deep, and it can never be taken away, no matter how many times you're born, no matter how many times you die. It is you. That knowledge is you. That knowledge cannot be taken. This can be understood when we see certain types of people who are born with certain kinds of knowledge. I don't mean the ability to do well in Jeopardy. I mean musical skill. Other types of skills. These are people who have that kind of knowledge deep inside. Sometimes it's still ego, very deep egos. But we have the case, for example, of certain people who have become very cognizant of spirituality and from a very early age show that. Very deep understanding. And that's a soul who has become cognizant of knowledge to that level. All of us have some of that to some degree, because we all have cognizance, but of different things. If we want to keep this teaching and not forget the path in our next life, we need to become deeply cognizant of the path. That is not through memorization. It isn't by wearing an outfit or going to a certain school. It isn't by following somebody or believing in somebody or paying dues. It is none of those things. It is cognizance, comprehension, being conscious, being awake, experiencing it and knowing it from experience. And that doesn't come through belief or theory. It comes through work. If you want that, meditate. A lot. More than you can imagine, meditate. Be very motivated. And comprehension of death is a very powerful motivator. Not from morbidity. And let me make a comment on that. There are many people who study and teach about the meditation on death and comprehending death, but they become very morbid, very dark. This is wrong. If you look at all these images that I showed you, none of these masters are morbid. And we tend to think of meditation on death or, angels of death. And we always imagine the cartoon image of an undertaker, very tall, skinny guy wearing all black, has a very pallid complexion. Angels of death or masters of death don't look like that. They look like this. Padmasambhava. They are beautiful. The angels of death, who we will talk about, are beautiful. When they go to work, they take on a spectral appearance, a scary appearance. But that's just their uniform. It's symbolic. But the actual being, the actual angel, is an angel with extraordinary beauty. But we have to comprehend those things, not just believe them or accept them or reject them. More?
Does the consciousness reincarnate in parallel universes simultaneously as well?
Does the consciousness reincarnate in parallel universes simultaneously? The question implies, how do I put this in words? But in essence, life is much more complicated than we can talk about in concepts. When we use the terms consciousness, soul, psyche, we're not really talking about a thing, but a movement. Something that's alive and in motion. And something that is not three-dimensional. Right now, all of us are multidimensional. We are only aware very hazily of the third dimension. And even in that, we're totally asleep and have no real cognizance of it. But in this very moment, our consciousness, our matter and energy, penetrates through all 7 dimensions. We just have no awareness of that. So the answer is both yes and no. The consciousness is simultaneously in multiple dimensions, what you could call parallel dimensions, but we have no cognizance of it. Yes?
When we give to others and are kind to others and give them our possessions, is there a danger of that becoming an attachment for them? Could that hinder their work by comforting them and doing all we can for them? Can that be a detriment to them in some way?
Well, let's see. If you're kind and compassionate to a person, can it be detriment to them?
As a form of attachment to them.
From you or from them?
Can they become attached to comfort and pleasure?
Oh, sure. Anybody can become attached to that. But what's your option?
Right.
To not be compassionate? Or to be indifferent? Those aren't options, really. We have to lead and teach by example. We have to live the best way we know how. For example, we teach Gnosis. We're teaching these concepts and theories and practices for people to put them into work, to put them into effort. but the vast majority of people won't. In fact, you could safely say that the majority of people who hear these teachings will turn against them. So what's the karma for that? Who bears the karma? It's the person who reacts, not the teacher. It's complicated. But the end result is what we have to aim for. And that end result is always determined by action, not inaction. We have to always be making the effort to perceive what is the best way for me to be helpful, to relieve suffering, and to help everyone, not just myself, but everyone. And that can't come through a golden rule. Always do A or always do B. It will always be in changing, always be in motion. In one moment, it's right to do what's on the left, and then the next moment, it would be right to do what's on the right, because things are always changing. In some moments, you need to be indifferent to a person. In other moments, you need to be what you might call negative, like strict or severe. And in the next, you need to be sweet. But knowing when is the right way is something only the being can show you through intuition, through experience. So there's no A or B. It's always be on the cusp of all things. Be perceptive and open. And that's how you learn when is it right, when is it not right. And it'll change. Another question.
The power of imagination can materialize itself in our current reality. Can it be, or will it be dangerous for us to meditate on death?
Great question. The question is about the power of visualization to materialize and become actual. And is there a danger in meditating on our physical death? Let me preface the answer that I'm going to give you. There are practices, which we will probably talk about superficially, related to transference of consciousness, related to the power to move the soul to a new body, and similar types of activities that an advanced practitioner can utilize. What those techniques demonstrate is the power of the energy of consciousness that's put in motion. In other words, it's possible through certain techniques for you to take your soul out of this body and put it in another body, and for this body to die. You could call that a kind of suicide or a kind of rebirth. You can call it what you will, but that is a technique that exists. That demonstrates the power of imagination, the power of the consciousness. Likewise, you can take the power of imagination, energy, and materialize things that are not physical. There are many examples of this. Alexandra David Neal, who is a French woman who lived in Tibet, learned this technique and working with other initiates, materialized a being that they all imagined. They created a living or a semi-living entity. But then it became a problem for them. And there were consequences that were not good from that. So the question is, can these exercises interfere with or harm the physical organism if we're visualizing the process of death? In certain cases, yes. But I'm not teaching you that. To really interfere with and harm your body, you'd have to work with this practice very intently and in combination with certain types of mantras and other energies. I don't think anyone here is working at that level. Working with visualization for comprehension will help you. And if you're worried about potential harm, do this practice the way you should do every practice. You first pray, please my inner God, my inner Father, my inner Buddha, my Divine Mother, teach me through this practice. Show me, help me comprehend, help me learn. Then engage in the practice, and then you'll be fine. If you do this practice with the intent to stop an organ, you can. And I can show you how that works. Master Samael taught an exercise in which you learn to slow your heart rate. And you can even stop your heart. You can do that if you have that intent. It's all in your hands. Every practice that we give, every exercise we give, can have different results depending on how you use it. Everything. Most especially sexual magic. The most power of any practice is in that. And probably most of the people who use it create harm because they engage in that exercise with lust, not transforming. So they do create harmful results. But hopefully over time with experience and more comprehension, they stop and start to create good results. So yeah, every practice has a potential depending on how the energy is used. Is there another question? Yeah.
How does us being conditioned to death affect us through movies, video games, cartoons?
Yeah, our cultural perspective on death has, in my opinion, desensitized us to the reality of death. So that now in our personalities, we tend to think of death as pain-free and inconsequential. Because we see people die on TV and in movies and in video games, and nothing ever painful happens because of that. We just, oh yeah, they died, okay. We don't feel it. We have no comprehension of it. And yet then, when somebody actually dies, we're completely overwhelmed. We become in an altered state where we can't even deal with the reality. And this shows the fundamental ignorance of our point of view of death. It lacks reality. In other cultures, this is not the case. In other cultures, for example, some Asian cultures and some South American cultures, death is part of daily life. Death is something that you see. When somebody dies, you see them dead. It's not avoided. It isn't hidden. Here in the West, it's hidden. The realities of death. For example, when someone dies in the movies, they always go, ah, and lay down and they're quiet. I'm sorry, but death's not like that. When people really die, it's excruciating to see it, to hear it. It isn't like on TV. It's painful in most cases. But we have no concept of that in the West because we've been so conditioned, so programmed by the media. This is something that we need to meditate on. We need to see the realities of death. In the Tantric tradition, this teacher, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, as part of his training, spent extended periods of time meditating in carnal grounds. A carnal ground is a place where dead bodies are placed. And depending on the status of the person, would be their state. The rich would have a big pile of wood and be burned rapidly by the people who worked in those places. And the people who are not so rich would have a little pile of wood and may not be completely burned. So there'd be leftovers from the bodies. And the poor would not be burned. They'd be eaten by animals and decayed by the elements. Padmasambhava would meditate in these places. Go into the middle, sit down, and contemplate death. This was not just to be cool, like people now that think it's cool to hang out in graveyards. This was to comprehend impermanence, death. And this is what is integral in his incredible compassion and power as a master, is this comprehension of death. The observation and comprehension of that reality. To us it sounds terrible and disgusting and horrible, but it's real. Every one of us, every human body we have ever seen will die and decay. And all the fluids and the guts and the organs will be dispersed. Sounds gross, but it's the fact. Moreover, when you really start to understand that, you realize how absurd it is that we're always lusting after corpses that are walking around. Really, all of us are corpses. We just don't realize it. Every body here will be a corpse. It's filled with filthiness, with pus, with excrement, blood, urine, all kinds of fluids and tissues that smell bad, that have gross textures, and all of us are carrying it around with us all the time. You realize that? You realize you're sitting in a bag of excrement? I know it sounds harsh, but it's true. Why do we think we're so great when we stink? We stink so much we have to put on perfume and bathe ourselves all the time because of the stink that exudes from our bodies. We are avoiding the truth. Get to know the reality of this body. It is not as beautiful as you think it is. But we need it. We need it. We need it to be healthy. We need it to be strong. We need to take care of it and prepare ourselves so that when it dies, we can leave it consciously and hopefully get a better body. Maybe the one that doesn't smell that bad. Any other question back here? Any more questions? Remember death.
To learn more about what you learned in this lecture, we invite you to explore the books published by Glorian Publishing, available from booksellers worldwide. You may also be interested in online courses or upcoming retreats, all of which you can learn about at GnosticTeachings.org. All of this has been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Will you help others to benefit from this knowledge? Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. Every donation helps. Make a donation now at GnosticTeachings.org. Thank you. May all beings be happy.
Señor.